I was still numb from losing my son when the lawyer called me for the will reading. My hands were trembling as I got into the car, my heart heavy with grief. I thought the hardest part of my day would be hearing my son's last wishes, but I was wrong. Because before I could even start the car, my neighbor appeared at my window, her face pale, eyes filled with something I couldn't understand. And the words she whispered next changed everything I thought I knew about my son. The day started with an unbearable silence. Ever since my son passed away, the house felt empty, as if the walls themselves carried the weight of grief. I couldn't bring myself to move his belongings. His jacket still hung by the door, his shoes still tucked neatly near the mat, and his laughter still echoed in the corners of my mind. Losing a child is not something any parent should endure. It's like someone ripped out a part of me that could never be replaced. The lawyer's call the night before had shaken me even further. He said the will reading was scheduled for today, and I had to be there. The words last will and testament echoed in my head again and again. Those weren't words a father should ever associate with his son. I kept asking myself, why did my son even have a will at his age? He was too young to be planning for death. There was something unsettling about it, as though he knew something I didn't. As I dressed, my hands trembled. Every movement felt heavy, as though I was carrying the world on my shoulders. I stared at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the man standing there. Hair graying faster than it had any right to, deep lines carved into my face by sorrow, and eyes that no longer held light. The man staring back looked broken. I moved slowly through the house, touching every item that reminded me of him. The photo on the mantel of his graduation, the medal from his school tournament, even the silly little clay figure he had made in 3rd grade. Each piece told a story of the boy I had raised, the man I had lost. Finally, I forced myself to grab my coat and head toward the garage. Today wasn't about me. It was about honoring my son's last wishes, no matter how painful they might be to hear. My heart pounded as I opened the car door. The thought of sitting across from strangers, lawyers, and perhaps even family members who had their own interests in my son's estate made my stomach churn. But just as I slid into the driver's seat, something caught my eye. Through the corner of the windshield, I saw my neighbor standing at the edge of her driveway watching me. She was usually cheerful, the type to wave every morning, but today she wasn't smiling. She looked pale, nervous, like she had been waiting for this very moment. At first I tried to ignore her. My grief was already too heavy. I didn't have the strength for small talk. But then, she slowly walked toward my car, her steps hesitant, almost shaky. She raised her hand, not in greeting, but as if to stop me from leaving. My chest tightened. Why now? What could possibly be so urgent? I rolled the window down, forcing a weak smile, though my heart was pounding. Her lips trembled as she leaned in closer, and before I could even ask what was wrong, she whispered words that made my blood run cold. Her voice was so faint I almost thought I had imagined it. The morning air was cold, and the way she leaned against the window, her breath fogging the glass, sent chills down my spine. I need to tell you something about your son, she whispered, her eyes darting nervously toward the quiet street, as if someone might overhear. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. My son? Why now when I was already dragging myself to his will reading? Couldn't this wait? What are you talking about? I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. Her eyes glistened, though I couldn't tell if it was from fear or sorrow. Please, don't go just yet. You deserve to know the truth before you walk into that room. The weight of her words hit me like a brick. Truth? What truth? My son was gone. What truth could possibly matter now? Unless he had kept something from me. My mind started to race back through the past months. He had seemed quieter than usual, though I chalked it up to work stress. He cancelled dinner plans more than once, and there were nights when I thought I heard him pacing in his room long after midnight, but I never pushed him. Maybe I should have. The neighbor glanced over her shoulder again. She lowered her voice even more. He came to see me 2 weeks before. Before it happened. He wasn't himself. He said he was scared. Scared. My heart dropped into my stomach. My son had never been the type to show fear, not even as a boy. He was strong, confident, the kind of person others leaned on. The thought of him going to someone else instead of me, his father, clawed at my chest. What was he scared of? I demanded, my voice breaking. She shook her head. I can't say it here. It's not safe, not safe. I looked around the empty street. Neighbors' houses stood quiet, cars parked neatly, gardens trimmed. Nothing about it screamed danger. Yet the way she spoke, trembling, made me feel as though danger was lurking just beyond my line of sight. "You need to come with me," she said suddenly. "Just for a moment. I'll show you something. Then, if you still want to go to the will reading, you'll at least know the truth." I stared at her, torn between two impossible choices. On one hand, my duty as a father was to honor my son by being present at his will reading. On the other hand, this woman, my neighbor, someone I had known for years, was telling me that everything I thought I knew about my son might not be the whole story. The clock on the dashboard ticked forward. If I delayed too long, I would be late. But my gut screamed at me that this wasn't just idle gossip. Her face was too pale, her voice too urgent. Finally, I turned off the ignition. "All right. Show me." She let out a shaky breath as though she had been holding it in for hours. Then she gestured toward her house. My legs felt like lead as I stepped out of the car and followed her across the driveway. Every step I took, I wondered if I was walking toward clarity or into a nightmare. The moment I stepped into her house, I felt an uneasiness in the air. It wasn't the kind of place that usually felt heavy. Her home had always been warm, filled with the scent of fresh flowers and the laughter of her children. But today the curtains were drawn tight, and the silence inside was almost suffocating. She closed the door quickly behind us, locking it with trembling hands. That small action made me realize just how serious this was. My pulse quickened. "Sit down," she urged, gesturing to the couch. Her voice was shaky, her eyes scanning the windows as though afraid someone was watching. I sat, but every muscle in my body was tense. "You need to tell me what this is about, now." She nodded, swallowing hard. Then, after a pause that felt like an eternity, she spoke. "2 weeks before the accident, your son came here." He was pale, restless. I had never seen him like that. "He told me he felt like he was being followed, that someone was watching him, waiting for him to slip." Her words hit me like a storm. "Followed? Watched?" My son had never said anything like this to me. Why her? Why not me, his father? My chest tightened with guilt. I should have noticed something, anything, but I was so caught up in my own routines that I had missed the signs. "What else did he say?" I pressed, my voice sharp. She hesitated, then looked straight into my eyes. "He said he had done something he couldn't undo, that he was scared the truth would come out." My blood ran cold. Done something he couldn't undo? What could my son, my good, kind son, possibly have meant by that? I shook my head. "That doesn't make sense. He wasn't a criminal, he wasn't reckless. What are you suggesting?" "I don't know," she whispered. But I know the fear in his eyes was real. "He made me promise I wouldn't tell anyone. But now, after what happened, I can't stay silent anymore." Her hands trembled as she reached into a drawer by the coffee table. She pulled out a small envelope, sealed but worn at the edges. She handed it to me as if it were something dangerous. "He left this with me," she said quietly. "He said if anything happened to him, I should give it to you." For a moment I just stared at the envelope, unable to breathe. My fingers shook as I reached for it. The weight of it felt heavier than paper should. Inside I could feel the outline of folded sheets, maybe letters, maybe documents. My throat went dry. I wanted to tear it open right there, but part of me hesitated. Did I really want to know what was inside? Would it comfort me, or destroy the last image I had of my son? She must have seen the conflict on my face, because she whispered, "Whatever is in there, it's what he wanted you to know." And it might explain everything. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in. The will reading waited for me, but now so did this envelope. My son's final secret. And I wasn't sure which truth I feared more. The envelope burned in my hand like a live coal. I stared at it, my thumb brushing against the seal, heart pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. This wasn't supposed to happen. I was supposed to drive to the lawyer's office, sit down and hear my son's final wishes. That was painful enough, but now I was standing at the edge of something darker, something I wasn't prepared to face. The neighbor sat across from me, wringing her hands. "Please," she whispered, "you need to read it. He wanted you to have this before anyone else could twist his words or his memory." Her urgency only made the air heavier. I turned the envelope over again and again, staring at my son's handwriting on the front. Just my name, nothing else. It was so simple, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. My stomach knotted. What if this letter revealed something I couldn't live with? A crime, a betrayal, or worse, a confession that his death wasn't an accident at all? I pressed the envelope against my chest, closing my eyes. For a brief moment I remembered him as a boy, running through the yard, laughing, calling me Dad with that bright smile. My throat tightened. How could that boy, that man, carry such a secret? I don't have time, I muttered, almost to myself. The will reading, if I'm late. The neighbor cut me off sharply. Do you think the will matters more than this? Documents, money, property, none of that will bring him back. But this? She pointed to the envelope, her eyes fierce. This is your son's voice. His truth. Isn't that what matters most? Her words pierced through me. She was right. What was an inheritance compared to the chance to hear my son's final thoughts in his own words? And yet I hesitated, because a part of me was terrified. If I opened it now, the truth would be unleashed. There would be no going back. Once I read his words, whatever innocence remained in my memory of him might shatter forever. I clenched my fists around the envelope. The clock was ticking. My car sat outside, waiting to take me to the will reading. Inside my hand, this letter waited to take me somewhere far darker. Finally, I stood. My neighbor looked at me expectantly, hope flickering in her tired eyes. Well? She asked softly. I don't know, I admitted. My voice cracked with the weight of the decision. If I read this now, I may never make it to that reading. And if I don't? I glanced toward the door, the shadow of time pressing against me. I may never know what he was truly hiding. The room felt suffocating. My son's ghost seemed to hang between the two choices, urging me, warning me. With trembling hands, I slid the envelope into my coat pocket. Not opened. Not yet. I'll go, I said finally, my voice hollow. But whatever is in this letter, it will find me, sooner or later. The neighbor's face fell with a mixture of relief and worry, as if she wasn't sure which path was safer. I turned and walked toward the door, each step heavier than the last. My heart was no longer just grieving. It was racing with fear, because now I wasn't only going to my son's will reading. I was carrying a secret that could change everything. The drive to the lawyer's office felt endless. Every streetlight I passed seemed to flicker like it was mocking me, whispering that I carried something heavier than I could bear. My hand kept brushing against the inside pocket of my coat, where the envelope rested. A silent reminder that I was walking into this meeting with a secret no one else knew existed. When I finally pulled into the parking lot, the sight before me was both familiar and unbearable. My other children, my daughter-in-law, even distant relatives, all of them were already gathered by the entrance. Their faces were tense, their voices low, their eyes darting toward me as I stepped out of the car. It was as if grief had taken a backseat to suspicion. My daughter-in-law, Clara, stood at the center of them like a queen awaiting her throne. Her posture was rigid, her smile tight but unmistakably triumphant, as though she was already sure of what the will contained. I could feel the chill in her gaze as it landed on me, a look that told me she was prepared for war, not mourning. About time, she said coldly, crossing her arms. We were beginning to wonder if you'd even show up. Her words cut deep, but I forced myself to stay silent. The envelope pressed against my ribs with every breath, reminding me that I had no room for careless mistakes. Inside the office, the air was thick with unspoken tension. The lawyer, a tall, thin man with graying hair and sharp eyes, motioned for everyone to take their seats. He glanced at me for a moment longer than necessary, almost as if he could sense the storm brewing inside me. We all sat around the heavy oak table, the kind of furniture that seemed designed to hold the weight of secrets and greed. My children fidgeted, whispering to each other when they thought I wasn't listening. Clara sat perfectly still, her chin raised, her fingers tapping against the wood in an impatient rhythm. The lawyer cleared his throat, his voice steady but grave. We are gathered here today to read the last will and testament of your son. The words nearly broke me. My son, my boy, reduced to documents and signatures. But before he could continue, I felt the neighbor's words echo in my mind. This is your son's voice. His truth. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. My hand brushed the envelope again, as though it was pulsing with life. I hadn't opened it, but its presence was louder than anything else in the room. Clara smirked, leaning forward. Let's get this over with. Some of us have been waiting a long time for this. The lawyer shot her a disapproving glance but didn't comment. Instead, he began reading. The legal phrases sounded distant and hollow to me. Bequests, assets, shares, conditions. Yet with each line I could feel the room heating up. Every eye burned with hunger. Every twitch of Clara's lips made me wonder just how far she would go to get what she wanted. And then, for a split second, I wondered, did my son know this would happen? Was that why he left me the envelope first? Was it a warning? Or was it a weapon? My pulse quickened. My throat was dry. I sat there, surrounded by family and vultures alike, realizing that this wasn't just a meeting about inheritance. This was a battlefield, and the letter in my pocket might be the only shield, or the deadliest sword. The lawyer's voice carried across the room like a steady drumbeat, every word chiseling itself into the air. He read each clause of the will with practiced precision, but to me it all felt surreal, like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. My son's properties were divided with care, a small vacation house to my younger daughter, savings accounts split among siblings, and certain personal possessions assigned with almost sentimental detail. His handwriting lingered in the margins, notes explaining why each item went to each person. Everyone listened with varying degrees of interest, some nodding, some whispering, but Clara's expression remained fixed, her smile frozen like a mask. It wasn't until the lawyer mentioned the family estate, the largest, most valuable asset, that her eyes finally sparked with fire. And as for the estate, the lawyer continued, it will not be transferred immediately. Instead, it will be placed under conditional trust, with stipulations that must be met before ownership is granted. Clara's fingers stopped their rhythmic tapping. She sat up straighter, her voice sharp. What stipulations? The lawyer adjusted his glasses, his expression unreadable. The will states that the estate cannot pass into anyone's hands unless certain conditions are fulfilled. Until then, it remains protected under trusteeship. The room erupted with murmurs. My other children shifted uncomfortably, exchanging confused looks. Clara's jaw clenched, her knuckles white against the table. This is absurd, she snapped. My husband was supposed to inherit that estate. And with him gone, that responsibility falls to me. Everyone here knows that. Her voice sliced through the room like a blade. Even the lawyer paused, as though gauging whether it was safe to continue. I stayed silent, though my chest burned with unspoken words. You think everything belongs to you. You think grief is a game you can win? The lawyer cleared his throat and pressed on. The stipulations will be revealed in due course. For now, all I can say is that this document suggests there are other instructions, ones we have not yet received. For the first time, Clara's mask cracked. A flicker of unease crossed her face. What do you mean, not yet received? I could feel the envelope pressing against me like a hidden heartbeat. I knew with a cold certainty that what the lawyer was referring to was resting in my pocket. My neighbor's words rang in my ears again. This is your son's truth, but the weight of that truth was suffocating me. If I revealed it now, it could destroy everything Clara thought she owned. It could shatter her smug confidence, turn the family's suspicion toward her, expose secrets she'd rather keep buried. But if I stayed silent, then she would win. Slowly, methodically, she would twist everyone to her side, using her charm and her lies until the estate, and perhaps even the memory of my son, belonged entirely to her. Clara leaned forward, her tone dripping with venom. I demand to know the full contents of this will. If someone is hiding something, it will come to light. And when it does... Her eyes flicked to me for the briefest second like a warning, like she already suspected I carried something. My pulse raced. I tightened my grip on the envelope beneath the table, every nerve screaming that a storm was coming, and for the first time since entering that room, I realized the bombshell wasn't in what the lawyer had read, it was in what he hadn't. The room had turned into a cauldron of suspicion. Every word from the lawyer's mouth was met with sharp glances, clenched jaws and impatient sighs. But no one's presence was heavier than Clara's. She sat there, her back stiff, her gaze piercing every corner of the room as if daring anyone to challenge her. You all heard him, she said finally, her voice cold and steady. The estate belongs to my late husband. My son may have added conditions, but let's be honest, we all know who this house, this land, this family legacy was meant for. Her words weren't just a statement, they were a claim, A declaration of power. My daughter shifted uncomfortably. But if the will has conditions, Clara cut her off sharply. Conditions written in grief, probably manipulated by someone whispering in his ear. Her eyes flickered toward me again, subtle but sharp enough to sting. The lawyer raised his hand, trying to restore order. Mrs. Clara, with all due respect, I must insist that we follow the exact terms. Until all documents are received and reviewed, nothing changes hands. Clara leaned back in her chair, her lips curling into a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, it will change hands. Sooner than you think." A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't what she said. It was the way she said it. As the lawyer continued, I noticed Clara's hands under the table. She wasn't fidgeting anymore. She was writing something. A folded slip of paper passed quickly to her brother, who sat across the room. He opened it discreetly, his brows furrowing before he nodded. It hit me then she wasn't just here to listen. She was plotting. My throat tightened as I clutched the envelope closer. I hadn't told anyone about it, not even the lawyer. If Clara suspected, if she even had the faintest idea that I carried my son's final truth, she would stop at nothing to get it. The lawyer's voice grew faint, drowned by the pounding in my ears. All I could hear was Clara's whisper earlier in the hallway, sharp and cold. "Some of us have been waiting a long time for this." She wasn't talking about mourning. She was talking about conquest. I looked around the room. My children avoided my eyes, nervous, confused, unsure whom to believe. And Clara. Clara was already working her invisible threads, binding them to her narrative before the truth could ever reach them. I swallowed hard, my decision pressing down on me like a vice. Should I open the envelope now in front of them all, exposing whatever secrets my son had left behind? Or should I wait, gather strength and strike when Clara least expected it? Either choice carried danger, but one thing was certain. Every passing second brought us closer to a reckoning, and Clara, my son's widow, my daughter-in-law, was ready to fight with claws bared. The lawyer's voice finally trailed off, closing the leather-bound folder with a heavy thud. "That concludes the will as it currently stands. Until the additional instructions arrive, this meeting is adjourned." Relief should have filled the room, but instead the silence was sharp enough to cut through bone. Clara was the first to break it, her laughter low and humorless. "So that's it?" she asked, her tone dripping with disdain. We sit around twiddling our thumbs, while some mysterious instructions conveniently delay what's rightfully mine. Her brother muttered in agreement, and a few others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly swayed by her confidence. My chest tightened. I could feel the envelope inside my coat, as if it were radiating heat, its presence screaming at me. I wanted to speak. I wanted to slam it down on the table and say, "Here, this is the truth my son left behind." But my throat betrayed me. My grief, my fear, my uncertainty, they all wrapped around my voice like chains. Clara stood, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. She walked slowly around the table, her heels clicking like a clock counting down. When she reached my side, she leaned close, her breath warm against my ear. "You can't stop this," she whispered. "Whatever tricks you think you have, they won't work. Everyone here knows I'm the rightful heir. And when the dust settles, you'll be nothing more than an old man clinging to shadows." Her words coiled around me like venom. She straightened and smiled sweetly at the others, masking her poison with charm. My youngest daughter spoke up timidly. "But if there really are more instructions, shouldn't we wait? Isn't that what he would have wanted?" Clara's smile faltered for only a second before she snapped, "Don't be naive. This family has always been built on strength. And right now I'm the only one strong enough to carry it forward." The lawyer frowned but didn't intervene. The others avoided eye contact, afraid of being the next target of Clara's sharp tongue. I felt the envelope burn against my chest. My son's voice, his truth, was in my hands. And yet, here I was, paralyzed. The neighbor's words echoed louder than ever. "This will change everything." And suddenly I realized Clara knew. She didn't just suspect. She knew I was holding something back. Her calculated glances, her veiled threats. She was circling me like a predator, waiting for me to falter. The air in the room had shifted. The inheritance was no longer just about money or property. It was about control, about legacy, about power. And the letter in my pocket wasn't just a piece of paper anymore. It was the fuse to a ticking bomb. The lawyer began gathering his papers, clearly eager to escape the thick fog of hostility that had overtaken the room. But no one moved. The air was charged, as if the meeting hadn't ended at all. It had only just begun. Clara's eyes followed him coldly before snapping back to me. She didn't need to say a word. Her smirk said it all. She believed she had already won. My hand trembled beneath the table as I clutched the envelope. For hours I had wrestled with the decision, every second a battle between fear and duty. My son's voice, his final truth, was locked within these folded sheets of paper, and now the moment of silence was unbearable. I pushed my chair back, the screech of wood against wood startling everyone. Their eyes snapped toward me, curious, confused, impatient. Clara tilted her head, her smile faltering just slightly as she noticed the envelope in my hands. "What's that?" she asked, her tone deceptively calm. I didn't answer. My throat was dry, but my fingers tightened around the paper. Slowly, deliberately, I laid the envelope on the table. The weight of it seemed to echo louder than any voice in the room. The lawyer blinked in surprise. "What is this?" "It's from my son," I finally said, my voice hoarse but steady. "Given to me before this meeting. He said it would explain everything." Gasps rippled through the room. Clara's mask cracked. Her calm demeanor broke into visible alarm. "That's impossible," she hissed, her composure slipping. If there was another document, the lawyer would have had it. Her words revealed more than she intended. For the first time, the others turned to her with suspicion. The lawyer leaned forward, his voice cautious. "May I see it?" I hesitated. The envelope pulsed in my hand like it was alive, like my son himself was begging me to finally let his truth out. I glanced around the table, my daughter's anxious faces, the relatives' hungry eyes, and Clara. Clara, who was practically vibrating with barely restrained panic. "No," she snapped suddenly, slamming her hand on the table. "We can't just take his word for it. For all we know, he wrote that himself, to steal what rightfully belongs to me." The room erupted in murmurs. Her outburst had betrayed her desperation. I stood, my voice rising for the first time since this ordeal began. "My son trusted me with this. He gave it to me with his dying breath. If you dare call it a lie, then you call him a liar." The lawyer reached out, his fingers trembling as I placed the envelope in his hand. He broke the seal, the sound tearing through the silence like thunder, and as he unfolded the pages, I caught a glimpse of my son's handwriting, familiar, shaky but strong. The lawyer cleared his throat, his expression shifting from professionalism to shock. He looked up, eyes wide, as if struggling to process the words written before him. "This," he whispered, "this changes everything." The lawyer adjusted his glasses, his hands shaking slightly as he stared at the paper. The entire room leaned forward in anticipation, the silence so heavy it pressed against our chests. He cleared his throat. This is indeed your son's handwriting. It is signed, dated, and notarized. There is no doubt this is authentic." A ripple of shock moved through the family. Clara's face drained of color. She forced a laugh that sounded brittle. "So what? Maybe it's just some personal note." But the lawyer didn't let her finish. His voice grew firm as he began to read aloud. "To my father, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. And I know the meeting will be filled with greed and false smiles. I could not allow my family's future to be poisoned by lies. There are things they don't know, truths that must come out now." Gasps echoed around the room. Clara stiffened, her hands gripping the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. The lawyer continued. "My estate will not pass into the hands of those who betray trust or manipulate my loved ones. I have written these conditions because I saw with my own eyes how Clara, my wife, plotted behind my back. She thought her secrets were safe. But they weren't." The words landed like a hammer. Every head turned toward Clara. Her mask shattered completely. Panic flashed in her eyes. "That's a lie," she shouted, her voice cracking. He must have been confused, sick. He didn't know what he was writing. The lawyer ignored her outburst and pressed on, his voice steady but weighted with gravity. "I discovered that Clara opened accounts in my name without my knowledge, siphoning money from the business and hiding it away. I know where the money went, and I know who helped her. But most of all, I know her intentions were never about love or family. They were about power." The room erupted in whispers, gasps, and disbelief. My daughters exchanged horrified glances. A distant cousin muttered, "My God." Clara slammed her fist on the table. He's lying! He's dead and he can't defend himself. This is just slander meant to... But her voice faltered when the lawyer read the final line of that page. If Clara contests this, know that I left evidence, records, statements, and witnesses that will surface if anyone denies the truth. The color drained from her face. She froze, her lips parting but no words escaping. For the first time, the predator looked cornered. My hands gripped the table as I whispered, barely audible, "He knew. He knew everything." The lawyer set the page down gently, his eyes scanning the room. "This letter makes it clear. The estate cannot pass to Clara. In fact, it stipulates she is to be excluded from all inheritance." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara's world had just crumbled before her eyes, and everyone knew it. But in that silence I could see the storm building in her gaze. The words hung in the air like a blade suspended above Clara's head. Everyone stared at her, their expressions a mixture of shock, disgust, and betrayal. For the first time, the woman who had commanded the room with icy confidence looked small, cornered, stripped bare. She slammed her hands on the table, rising to her feet. "This is outrageous." He was weak, he was sick. Anyone could have made him write this. "You all know me. You know I stood by him through everything. I am his wife." Her voice cracked, the mask of control slipping into raw desperation. But the harder she pushed, the more hollow her words sounded. My daughter whispered sharply, "If you really loved him, why would he write something like this?" Clara's eyes darted around the table, searching for allies, but faces that once looked sympathetic now glared with suspicion. Even her own brother shifted uneasily in his chair, avoiding her gaze. She turned her fury toward me, her finger stabbing the air like a weapon. "This is your doing. You've always hated me, always wanted to turn him against me. You forged this. You convinced him to write lies to keep me out." The accusation stung, but the truth in the lawyer's hands was louder than her venom. He held up the document firmly. "Mrs. Clara, this was notarized by a third party. It is legally binding. There is no question of forgery. These were your husband's final words." Her face twisted into rage. She grabbed the edge of the table, her nails scraping against the polished wood. "No, I won't let this happen. This estate belongs to me. This family belongs to me." The lawyer stood, his voice rising above the chaos. "Enough. If you continue to behave this way, I will have no choice but to remove you from these proceedings." The room fell into tense silence. Clara stood there, trembling, her chest heaving with fury. For a moment it seemed like she might collapse or explode. Then slowly her expression changed. The fire in her eyes dimmed, replaced by something darker. A cold smile crept across her lips. "You think this changes anything?" she whispered, her voice low but chilling. "Paper doesn't erase power. You'll see. None of you can survive without me." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. She wasn't admitting defeat. She was warning us. The others avoided her eyes, whispering nervously. The atmosphere was thick with fear and tension, but beneath it all, I could sense something else brewing. This wasn't just the collapse of Clara's scheme. This was the beginning of her last, desperate move. The room vibrated with the weight of Clara's words. Her cold smile, her threat, her refusal to accept the truth, it all settled like poison in the air. Nobody dared to speak, but everyone could feel it. This wasn't over. Then the lawyer cleared his throat, his voice steady but firm. "There's something else." Mr. Jonathan anticipated resistance. He left a video message to be played only if disputes arose. Every head snapped toward him. My heart pounded in my chest. Clara froze, her face draining of color. The lawyer pressed a button, and the screen on his laptop flickered to life. Jonathan's face appeared, frail but his eyes sharp and resolute. The room fell into silence as his voice echoed. "If you're watching this, it means Clara has tried to twist what I've left behind. Let me be clear, I know the truth. I know what you did to me, Clara. The manipulation, the isolation, the way you tried to control every corner of my life. I may have been weak in body, but not in mind. And this will is my final freedom from you," Clara gasped, stumbling backward as though struck. No, he couldn't. But Jonathan's words continued, cutting deeper with each sentence. "To my family, forgive me for staying silent for so long. I thought I loved her, but I was blind. Now I leave my legacy not to chains of greed, but to those who truly cared for me. Protect each other, and never let Clara's darkness take root again." The screen went black. The silence that followed was deafening. Tears welled in my eyes, and I saw others quietly crying too. Clara's face twisted in horror. He was sick. He didn't know what he was saying, she screamed, but her voice cracked under the weight of undeniable truth. The lawyer's voice cut like a judge's gavel. Mrs. Clara, this is irrefutable evidence. You have no claim here. From this moment, you are formally excluded from all inheritance matters. Her final mask shattered. She let out a strangled cry, a sound somewhere between rage and despair. Her knees buckled and she collapsed into her chair, clawing at the table like a drowning woman clinging to driftwood. Nobody moved to comfort her. Nobody spoke in her defense. For the first time, Clara was utterly devastatingly alone. I looked at her, my heart heavy but resolute. It's over, Clara. You can't hurt us anymore. Her eyes met mine, full of venom and despair. And then, without another word, she rose shakily and stormed out of the room, the echo of her footsteps fading like the final notes of a dark symphony. The air lifted, like chains falling away. We had survived her storm, but her shadow would linger for a long time. The echo of Clara's footsteps faded down the hallway, and with it an unbearable silence filled the room. It wasn't the tense silence of fear anymore. It was the silence after a storm, when the wreckage is finally visible. The lawyer closed the file with deliberate calmness, as though putting a period at the end of a tragic chapter. I sat frozen, my hands still trembling from everything we had just witnessed. Jonathan's final words kept replaying in my head. Protect each other, and never let Clara's darkness take root again. His voice had been full of both sorrow and strength, as if he had finally freed himself from the chains that bound him. Around me the family shifted uneasily. My daughter wiped at her eyes, her husband holding her hand tightly. My grandson, too young to understand everything, only clung to his mother, asking in a whisper why everyone was crying. It broke my heart, but in that moment I also felt something I hadn't in months, a glimmer of peace. The lawyer spoke again, his tone softer now. Jonathan's instructions are clear. His estate will be divided fairly among you, in accordance with the will. Clara has no claim. He hesitated for a moment before adding, he wanted you to move forward, free from her shadow. Those words hit harder than I expected. For so long, Clara had loomed over us all, manipulating, controlling, casting doubt and fear wherever she went. The idea of a life without her influence felt almost unreal. Yet here we were, standing at the threshold of that very possibility. I looked around the table. There was grief in every face, yes, but there was also relief. Shoulders that had been tense for years seemed to lower. Breaths that had been shallow now came deeper. It was as though Jonathan's final act had given all of us permission to breathe again. But the damage Clara had done couldn't be erased overnight. My daughter's eyes held years of exhaustion from the battles she had fought with her father's second wife. My son-in-law still carried resentment in his jaw, his hands clenched even as he tried to relax. And I carried guilt. Guilt for not protecting Jonathan sooner. Guilt for letting Clara sink her claws into our family unchecked. As the family began to leave the meeting room, I lingered behind. I needed a moment alone. The lawyer gave me a small nod, understanding, before closing the door gently behind him. I stared at the empty chair where Clara had sat, her venom still lingering in the air like a ghost. She had stormed out defeated, but her presence wasn't gone. Not really. Her words, her lies, her cruelty, they had scarred us all. Yet Jonathan's video echoed louder in my mind than her threats. His courage in the end had rewritten the story. He had chosen truth over manipulation, love over fear. That mattered more than anything Clara had tried to destroy. I whispered softly, almost as though speaking to Jonathan himself. You did it. You broke her hold. For the first time in years, I felt a strange but powerful sense of hope. The war was over. Now came the long road of healing. The drive home after the inheritance meeting felt strangely quiet. The roads looked the same. The houses stood where they always had. Yet everything inside me had shifted. Clara was gone from our lives, stripped of power and entitlement. But her shadow still followed us like an echo. When I walked into my daughter's home later that evening, I found her sitting in the living room, staring at Jonathan's framed photograph on the mantelpiece. Her eyes were red and swollen, but there was a softness to her face I hadn't seen in a long time. She can't hurt us anymore, she whispered as I sat beside her. Her voice cracked, but it carried relief. For years I thought she'd win, that she'd take everything from us, but Dad. He found his voice even at the end. I placed my hand over hers. He did more than that. He gave us back our lives. My grandson came running in then, holding a toy car, his laughter piercing through the heavy air. He tugged at his mother's sleeve, unaware of the storm that had just passed. Watching him, I realized what Jonathan must have seen in his final days, the hope that lay in the next generation. A chance to break free from the cycle Clara had nearly cemented. That night, we ate dinner together as a family, something we hadn't done peacefully in a long time. There was no tension in the room, no sharp remarks, no manipulative glances waiting to strike. It was simple. A table, food, and love. It reminded me of a time before Clara had come into our lives, back when Jonathan laughed easily, and family gatherings were filled with warmth. Still, the wounds she left behind were undeniable. My daughter admitted quietly, "Sometimes I still hear her voice in my head. The way she belittled me, the way she tried to make me feel unworthy. It doesn't just disappear." I nodded slowly. Scars don't vanish overnight, but they remind us we survived. We sat there in silence for a while, letting those words settle. Then my son-in-law spoke, breaking the heaviness with determination. "We owe it to Jonathan to build something better. Clara thrived because she divided us. No more of that. From now on, we stick together." His words sparked something in me. For so long, Clara's tactics had kept us fractured. But now perhaps unity was our strongest weapon against the remnants of her cruelty. Later that night, when everyone had gone to bed, I found myself alone again, sitting by the window. The moonlight streamed across the floor, and I thought of Jonathan. I remembered his laugh, his quiet strength, and even his flaws. He wasn't perfect, but he was ours. And in the end, he had given us the greatest gift, freedom from a woman who thrived on control. I closed my eyes and whispered, "We'll honor you, Jonathan." Not with bitterness, but with love. For the first time in what felt like forever, sleep came easily. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of Clara's downfall began to spread through the community. It wasn't just within our family. Her reputation had been a storm cloud, hanging over many others too. She had spent years weaving her web of charm and manipulation, convincing neighbors, acquaintances, even friends of Jonathan, that she was a sainted wife, carrying the weight of the world. But now the truth had cracked that mask wide open. Word traveled quickly after the inheritance meeting. People began to realize that Jonathan hadn't been the weak-willed man they thought he was, but a victim of Clara's iron grip. And suddenly, the sideways glances we had endured for years turned into sympathetic nods and gentle words. At the grocery store, one of our neighbors stopped me. She placed a hand on my arm, her voice soft. "We always wondered, but we didn't want to believe it. Jonathan was such a kind man. I'm glad his truth finally came out." It struck me then how far Clara's influence had reached, how much damage she had inflicted, not just on us, but on how people saw Jonathan. He had carried the burden of her lies silently, and yet even in death he had found a way to reclaim his name. My daughter noticed it too. At her workplace, co-workers who had once kept their distance began treating her with more warmth, almost as though the stigma attached to Clara had lifted. It was subtle, but healing often comes in small shifts like that. But healing wasn't only about the community. Inside our family, something deeper was happening. We were learning how to speak without fear again. Conversations at dinner grew lighter, laughter returned, and the atmosphere in the house shifted from survival to living. One evening, as we gathered for tea, my son-in-law raised his cup in a quiet toast. "To Jonathan," he said, "for finally setting us free." We clinked cups, and in that small gesture, I felt the weight of years begin to lift. Yet even as life started to brighten, I couldn't help but notice Clara's absence as a lingering shadow. It wasn't her presence we missed, but the scars she left behind that surfaced in unexpected ways. My daughter still startled at raised voices. My grandson sometimes asked where Grandma Clara had gone, and I often woke in the night, heart pounding, dreaming of the battles we had fought under her roof. But there was a difference now. Those fears no longer had power over us. They were reminders of what we had endured, not chains binding us to her. I often walked by Jonathan's grave, bringing fresh flowers each week. I would tell him about the little victories, how his grandson had won a school award, how we'd all sat together in peace, how his name was being remembered with respect again. And each time I stood there, I felt closer to him, as though he were still guiding us with the courage he found in his final days. Clara might have left scars, but Jonathan had left us a legacy, one of truth, resilience, and love strong enough to outlast the darkest storm. Months passed, and slowly, the sharp edges of grief softened. The pain of losing Jonathan never fully went away, it never does, but it changed shape. It became quieter, gentler, something that reminded us of love rather than loss. Clara's absence, too, became less of a looming shadow and more of a distant memory. She had tried to tear our family apart, but ironically her downfall had brought us closer together. We found strength not in her cruelty, but in the way we had survived it. One evening, as autumn leaves painted the ground in shades of gold and red, we gathered at Jonathan's favorite park for a small memorial. My daughter brought a framed photograph of him, smiling the way I loved to remember him, genuine, carefree, untouched by Clara's darkness. My grandson placed a bunch of wildflowers at the base of a tree Jonathan had planted years ago. We stood there together, letting the crisp air wrap around us. I spoke quietly, my words carrying the weight of both sorrow and gratitude. Jonathan, you gave us your final gift, the truth. You reminded us that love must never bow to fear, and that silence in the face of cruelty only allows it to grow. We promise you this. We will live honestly, we will protect each other, and we will never again let anyone like Clara break us. Tears glistened in my daughter's eyes, but she smiled through them. He'd be proud, she whispered. In that moment, I realized that Jonathan's legacy wasn't about money, property, or even the inheritance that Clara had tried so desperately to control. His true legacy was freedom. The courage to break free from manipulation, the unity we had rebuilt from the ashes of her schemes, the love that endured, even through betrayal and pain. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't believed possible. The war was finally over, not just with Clara, but within ourselves. We had faced the darkness, and we had chosen light. That night, when I tucked my grandson into bed, he asked softly, "Grandpa, is Grandma Clara coming back?" I shook my head gently. "No, sweetheart, she's gone, and she can't hurt us anymore." He smiled, satisfied, and drifted to sleep. And as I watched his peaceful face, I knew the cycle had been broken. His childhood would be filled not with fear and tension, but with love and laughter. That was the greatest justice Jonathan could have asked for. Before I turned out the light, I whispered one final thought to myself. The storm has passed. And we survived. For the first time in years, I truly believed it. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed how greed or manipulation can tear families apart? Or maybe you've seen how truth and love can heal even the deepest wounds. Your voice matters, and I'd love to hear it. If you found yourself holding your breath during this journey, please hit that like button. It really helps more people discover these powerful stories. And if you want more tales of betrayal, justice, and redemption, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss what's coming next. Together, let's keep these stories alive and learn the lessons they carry. Thank you for being part of this community. You are what makes it stronger every day.